Deuteronomy chapter 8. I'm going to give you something I saw reading my Bible not too long ago. Take a little note on it. Deuteronomy chapter 8. And the thought with this passage is why men don't come to church, which is kind of funny because my Sunday school class, it was like I had 8 men and 2 girls in here. So I definitely outnumbered the men's side of it. And today, excluding kids, we got Matthew and Dean, and John is 16. She's 16. So you guys kind of balance each other out. I don't know if we count you guys or not. You're taller than me, but that doesn't mean you're not still kids yet. So, yeah, I think with Matthew and Dean, the adult men outnumber the ladies here too. So it's kind of a strange thing, isn't it? But Deuteronomy 8, I want to be thinking about this, about why men don't need the Lord. And we're going to look at this from Deuteronomy 8, and I'll say a few words. This thing could go 5 minutes. It could go 50 minutes. Got a few thoughts, and I'll just see where my thoughts lead me to. Let's start reading Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 1. All the commandments which I command thee this day shall ye observe to do, that ye may live and multiply, and go in and possess the land which the Lord sware unto your fathers. Thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble thee, and to prove thee, and to know what was in thine heart, whether thou wouldest keep his commandments or no. And he humbled thee, and suffered thee to hunger, and fed thee with manna which thou knewest not, neither did thy fathers know, that he might make thee know that man doth not live by bread bread only, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of the Lord doth man live. Thy raiment waxed not old upon thee, neither did thy foot swell these 40 years. Thou shalt also consider in thine heart that as a man chasteneth his son, so the Lord thy God chasteneth thee. Therefore thou shalt keep the commandments of the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways and to fear him. For the Lord thy God bringeth thee into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and depths that spring out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of oil, olive, and honey. I almost said that the other way around, olive oil. A land wherein thou shalt eat bread without scarceness. Thou shalt not lack anything in it. The land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills thou mayest dig brass. When thou hast eaten and art full, then thou shalt bless the Lord thy God for the good land which he hath given thee. Oh, that's great. Right up until verse 11. Everything right there is great. And it's right up to that point, right in verse 11, is where I started to think about men. And of course, being a man, I have a insight into being a man. But right up to that point, I started thinking about men and a man's kind of drive. A man is driven, and a man is driven to work. He's driven to provide. He's driven to make things, create things, invent things. And if he's given responsibility, he's driven to provide for that responsibility. He's driven to make money and be a provider. And boys will dream about the best ways, the best jobs they can get so they can make the most money. And I remember over in Ukraine, all of the teenage boys over there, all they ever wanted to do was they just wanted to come to America so they could make a lot of money over here. And the Ukrainians I know over here, they're hard workers, right? They're not a burden on the system. They find a way to make money, like the Ukrainians I know. They do a good job at it. But it's kind of a hard thing with children to get them to balance out. It says, yes, you need to, that's a good drive to work, to get an education, to go earn money. That's a good drive, but just don't let not your heart settle upon the monies, right? It's a hard thing to get balanced out. But as a man grows up and then he gets some taste of success, and he gets some taste of money. Well, what's he going to do with it once he gets the taste? He's going to bite. He's going to take more. He's going to take more. He's going to want to desire more, consume more, get more. And just practically speaking, I can speak from my own family experience. Our coffers only get bigger. Coffers, I mean the coffin we live in. By coffin we live in, I mean our storehouses only get bigger, right? You know what I mean? It's when we were just freshly married, we owned nothing, and then we got a house. We stayed at a house, and then what do you do as soon as you get a house? You fill it. You fill it up. It's the first thing you do. And then once you fill up the house, what do? Get a bigger house, build a barn, right? And what do you do with that? You fill it up. And that's great. You know, I'm not criticizing that. I'm just saying that there's this drive in men in particular that man wants to be successful. He wants to attain. He wants to make. He wants to be good at his job. And he will drive himself and consume himself to get into where he's there. Now, up to, in this passage that we're reading, okay, we knowing the history of what has happened here, we have these men that God called them out of the wilderness. He designated certain families to be warriors, most of them to be warriors. He designated the men out for them to be soldiers, and then certain ones he designated to be the Levites. He designated to be in charge of the worship, and along the way, right up here in verse 3, it says that he humbled them, and he suffered them to hunger. But he always provided them. God always provided them day by day by day. He gave them basically just what they needed. I imagine out in the wilderness, there really wasn't that multiplication of goods. I imagine. I can't imagine how there could be. How could there be a multiplication of goods when every 6, 7, 8, 10 days you got to pull your roots up and go move down the road 8, 10 miles? How can you accumulate goods when you're doing that? I don't know. Maybe you could somehow, but you're not trading with anybody. You're making clothes. I mean, your clothes never wore out, right? Maybe they multiplied their clothes because they always made themselves a new suit every year, and their old one was still good. You know, colors never faded, threads never wore out. I mean, it's a strange thing that God was there and preserved them and kept care of them, took care of them. But it's only if you're carrying it on your shoulders. I mean, that's starting life all over again. Just ask me, I know. Take what you have and what you can carry on your shoulders you keep, and everything else you don't. So it's like you're only limited to so much. But what happened as soon as they got into the land? Well, they put down roots. They were able to really plant and really multiply their flocks, right? I mean, this success angle, like we're looking back, going all the way back to Genesis, and you can look at the patriarchs. You can look at Abraham, how he was one of the wealthiest men on the earth. Abraham was, and unique in such that his heart was not set upon the riches. Right? The verse says, "If thy riches increase, set not thine heart upon them." And Abraham did that, and Isaac did that. Jacob, 50-50. But they multiplied. And they were able to set up homes and multiply and go. Well, the Israelites, of course, they started out with nothing because they were slaves. But when they got called out of the land of Egypt, the Egyptians gave them gifts, gave them monetary things, gave them clothing, and they were able to live off that over the next 40 years, I guess. And where they couldn't live off of it, God provided for them. And that's the whole point of this manna, was that they did not have the ability to feed themselves in the wilderness over that 40-year struggle, and so God took care of them. Well, we all know as soon as they crossed that Jordan River, and as soon as they went into the land, what does it say in Joshua? Isn't it Joshua? I think it's Joshua chapter 2. What does it say about the manna? It says in Joshua, I believe it's chapter 2, it says that the manna ceased the day that they went into the promised land. And then what happened? Well, it transitioned, didn't it? It went from God taking care of their physical needs passing on to, now it was their turn, of course, to work and to take care of their physical needs. Maybe it wasn't Joshua 2. Where is that? Joshua 4. It's actually 5. It's actually Joshua 5 is when they go into the promised land. So they were living in this economy where God was he was keeping their clothes from wearing out, and he was keeping their stomachs full, and he had just, from that time, he had just taken them out of the promised land, they had just taken them out of Egypt to where they were slaves and they were crying out for their bondage and they had less than nothing. So they went from that to this miraculous 10-plague man of God, Moses, with his rod coming through and driving and bringing them out and drawing them out, and that big miracle there, and they get to cross the Red Sea, and they get to see this big stand of water here and this big pile of water here, and they get to cross and they get to turn around and they get to see the chariots of Egypt following after them, and they're over here standing there and their eyes just dropped and said, they're coming, they're coming, they're coming. But as soon as the last man of the Israelites was out, that water caved in on them and killed. How much of that did man do? You seeing what I'm saying about this? How much of that part did man do? Right? Man didn't do a single thing. And so God takes these people that had nothing, were nothing, and God establishes his covenant, makes them a people. Like, God did something special with them. He created them. He saved them. He delivered them. And then the next step was he brings them up to the Mount Sinai, and he brings them before God there, and God speaks to them from the burning bush on Mount Sinai, and God establishes them and says, now listen, that you did the miracle. I saved your lives. I saved your souls out of the land. Now listen, now I'm going to give you some Ten Commandments. I'm going to give you some boundaries to live by that are going to be healthy for you and keep you going. And so he gave them the commandments, and this is where we get into Deuteronomy chapter 8. Because once they get into the wilderness, then they start to wander, or they wandered because they went right up to the boundary of the land, and they chose to send out spies, and those 12 spies went in, and they said, we can't do it. We're not man enough to do it. And so God says, you're not man enough, and you've forgotten already that it was me, God, the one who's going to be your God. And so, okay, we're going to wander in the wilderness for a bit. And they tried to go in. God didn't let them go in. So they wandered for 40 years. And so that's where he goes back down here to Deuteronomy 8:3. It's like he humbled them. But verse 2 says, you shall remember. You got to remember. In verse 3, he humbled them. And you know that how did they truly live? They truly lived by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. So then they go into the land of Canaan, and it starts talking about that in verse 7. And this land was a good land. The land had all kinds of food and fruit and harvest, and it was ready for them to eat. Like, the trees were full, the land was full. It was added. God brought them in at a time when that manna ceased, that 3 million men, 4 million man civilization, they were able to live off the land from day one without any preparation, without any setup. God set this thing up. And it talks about the wheat and the barley, the vines, all this stuff, verses 8 and verses 9. But then they get down, with all of that preparation, now it's man's turn to take over. God had been providing for him, had been taking care of them left and right, and now it's man's turn to take over. Meaning this is what God wanted them to do. God had kind of brought them through the birth and given them strength and kept them safe as they grew for 40 years. But now it was the Israelites' turn to trust God and to keep his commandments and to go into Canaan and to fight and to win and to fight and to win and to trust and obey and trust and obey and fight and win. And it was man's turn to do it. Well, God's telling them, when you do this, verse 10, when you get to where you're eating and art full, then thou shalt bless the Lord thy God for the good land which he hath given thee. And he comes to this verse 11, but, I'm adding the but in there, beware that thou forget not the Lord thy God, in keeping his commandments and his judgments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, lest when thou hast eaten and art full and hast built goodly houses and dwelt therein. Who's doing all that? Man is. The man's doing that. He's going into a land. He has to go and fight the Philistines and the Canaanites and the Jebusites and some giants. What does a man want more than anything in his life? Is he wants a challenge to face. Man wants a challenge. He said, man doesn't want a challenge. Like, oh yeah, man wants a challenge. He says, you look at the Marines. Every Marine I've ever met just loves the fact that they were a Marine. I've never met a Marine who was embarrassed by the fact that he was a Marine. Got a friend flying around in here. And what do we know about the training of the Marines? It ain't easy, I don't think. We were just hearing a story about it. The last week, isn't it? It's called the Crucible, or is it the last several days? Last several days before you get in, it's called a crucible. Why? Because they crucify. That's what the idea is. What happens when you put a group of men into a scene and they struggle through it together, but they come out the other side victorious? What happens with those group of men? Well, you've just created friends for life by doing that. In some sense, our church has kind of gotten to a position where they had a growing stage, but then kind of came out of a struggling phase. Now it's just complacency, and that's not a great spot to be. Got to find a struggle again. We got to find a challenge. So they get this challenge where they're fighting the Philistines and the Jebusites and the Campbellites. I'll just say that. It's not one of them. And they're fighting them, and they win, and then they have to go build cities, and they got to multiply, and they got to work. And when thy herds and thy flocks have multiplied, and thy silver and gold is multiplied, and all that thou hast is multiplied. So he's saying this is the man's labor. Man is doing this work. Man is going after this. And he says when you've multiplied everything, and you've put your hand to the plow, and you've worked and sweat and labored, because if you work and labor, you're going to get reward. You're going to get fruit from it. Proverbs says, in all labor there is profit. Okay, labor is going to reward you with profit. And when you do that, and he's just saying, beware, verse 11, he says 14, he says, beware that thine heart be lifted up, and thou forget the Lord thy God, which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt and from the house of bondage, who led thee through the great and terrible wilderness, wherein were fiery serpents and scorpions and drought, where there was no water, and brought thee forth out of the rock of flint, who fed thee in the wilderness with manna which thy fathers knew not, that he might humble thee, and that he might prove thee to do thee good at thy latter end. And then look at it in verse 17. So we've gone this whole thing where if they could track their history, and I know that was like before their time, because most of these people died, they were young maybe when they saw the land of Egypt, and maybe they forgot what it was, the land of Egypt. Because all the older generation, except for two, they all died in that wilderness, but there were some younger kids that were, and maybe teenagers too, probably good chunks of them, but they saw God's hand, and they heard God's voice, and they saw God's provision, and just a generation later, just 10 years later maybe, just 20 years later, God's saying, beware, because you're going to get to a spot where you're going to say, in thine heart, my power and the might of my hand hath gotten me this wealth. And that right there is the key to why men don't like going to church. Is because they want success, and they're going to do it by their hand alone. I'm going to build my life. I'm going to build my kingdom. I'm too busy. I'm going to work. And men totally ignore the fact that you don't have, apart from God holding you up, you have no strength whatsoever to do anything. You can't get up out of the bed out of the morning. You can't breathe. You can't have time to go to work. You don't got a brain. You don't got health. You don't got wisdom. You don't got energy. You have nothing apart from Jesus Christ keeping your heart beating. And you might be successful, and you might get the job done, and you might make yourself a business, and you might grow, but it ain't you. It's God who's given you the strength to do it. And he's trying to tell these Israelites up front, he's like, listen, you're going to go in, and because they were God's people, they're Israelites, man, those guys know how to make a buck. You know how that works. You want to know how to make a buck? Go talk to a Jew, man. They know how to make some money. He's like, when you go in and you're going to make money, he says, stop it. It has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with the glory of God. And that's what he's saying. Thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it is he that giveth thee power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant which he sware unto thy fathers as it is this day. So they've forgotten. And they've forgotten. And men don't want to come to church because, I don't need God. Men don't need God. I did this. I built my kingdom. I built my house. I established my wealth. I built my inheritance. I. And that's natural for the man to want to do that, but he's forgotten that it's God. And with all, that whole angle is what you need to realize is every step along the way, the proper thing to do is never, ever, ever put yourself at the center of your story. Never make you be the center of who you are. You take you and you replace it with God. And that's how we give glory to God. And that's how we not forget that it's God. And when you're at work and you're doing something great and you're doing better than everyone around you, people see you and they say, man, this Casey guy, he's a great guy. Oh, God's great. God gave me strength. God gave me this. God protected me, provided me, saved my soul. The only reason I'm even doing the best I can is because God. Okay, we get God. And maybe a secondary thing, if I wanted to throw this in there, we'll keep reading this in the chapter here. It shall be, if thou do at all forget the Lord thy God, and walk after other gods, and serve them and worship them, I testify against you this day that ye shall surely perish. As the nations which the Lord destroyeth before your face, so shall ye perish, because ye would not be obedient unto the voice of the Lord your God. So, I was thinking I was going to take us over to Ezekiel. Let's go over to Ezekiel. I think I got a moment. And we're going to turn over to Ezekiel chapter 16. And I had a secondary thought, but it kind of ties into this idea. So, men think their own hand and strength is what's gotten them to where they are. So they don't want God. Okay? Women are much more likely to, as followers, much more likely to acknowledge that it's God, not them, right? Mostly, in most churches, apparently except ours, mostly it's more women and children, right? Well, the secondary problem of that is because men want to challenge, and how much do you get challenged at church? I mean, really? If you challenged here, maybe you're going to be challenged by the words of God from the pulpit, but I don't think we challenge us very much, and I don't know that we should. I'm not trying to change what we do here at church. I'm not smart enough to do that. But how much do we really get challenged? Challenging for me is talking to somebody about the Lord. That's challenging for me. I'm not good at it. I don't particularly enjoy it. It's challenging for me to do it. Last Sunday we took a challenging where I challenged the church. So let's go. We're going to go out to this corner. We're going to be nobodies. We're going to hold scripture signs and wave at people and smile. I mean, that's not even really challenging, but it can be. It was. And we had a really good turnout. I was very happy about the turnout that we had. That's a challenging thing. Stuff like that. That's when it costs you time and effort, and maybe even some emotional investment. That's something like the Marines, where we're going to go through a challenging event together to where we grow. That's what we need. That's what men need. That's what women need. But women need some men that are going to take care of them. And men need to put themselves out there and challenge themselves in serving Jesus Christ. The men are not being challenged. How many, Sarah and I have talked about this a couple times, like we have several of our friends that have daughters that are of marrying age, and it's like they're beautiful. The daughters are beautiful. And they're 18, and then they turn 20, and then they turn 24, and then they turn 26, and then they turn 30, and it's just like, why aren't they getting married? It's like, they're beautiful. They're hardworking. And it's like, well, the men are getting less and less men. Men are walking away from the Lord because they're not being challenged, and they're getting this stuff where they're thinking that their own hands are going to build themselves their own kingdom. That's a small part of it at least. But look what we get here in Ezekiel 16, and this is maybe a second side of it, and then I'll close out with this here. Ezekiel chapter 16, and all we're going to read down here is down to verse 49. I guess we'll just jump right to the text. Now, this is not the only place that talks about Sodom and Gomorrah, okay? This is one of 3 passages that talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. Don't take this meaning to mean that sodomy isn't sodomy, because it is. But you need to read Genesis 13, 18. You need to read Jude 7. Okay, those are the places that tell you the whole picture. You need 3 passages. There's typically always 3 passages that tell you about the sin. It's not just this one, although this one tells you the heart matter of the thing. Okay, Jude 7 tells you what the physical aspect of it was, and of course Genesis shows you what it was and an application of it and the destruction. But notice this, look at this. This was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom. Pride, that's the man part right there. Working with his hands, accomplishing things, he thinks he's proud. Proud about what I've done. Proud about who I am. That's every American I've ever met. We sing songs about it proudly on July 4th. Proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. Are we free, Brother John? Not even close, man. That's the worst thing, is when you think you are. But you're so proud you're blind to do it all, aren't you? But pride. Fullness of bread. See how that ties back to what we just read in Deuteronomy? Fullness of bread. What did the Israelites do? They went into a city, they went into a new place, victories, battles to fight, they win, they built themselves big kingdoms, and they planted themselves gardens, they filled themselves. Beware that you forget God. They filled themselves. They had pride, they had fullness of bread, and then this next one is, it's striking, it's piercing to my own heart, to yours, which says, and abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters. Abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters. When you are America, and this, in my opinion, any missionary that gets up here, and I was one, who's been out of the country and lived out of the country, every single missionary, I think there might be, I can think of one exception, but every other missionary, besides that one that I can think of, the large majority of missionaries who've been overseas and lived out of the country, amongst nationals, will tell you that there is no substitution for America. This is it. This is the best country in the whole wide world, period. Why? Well, a big part of it is, the practical side of it, the spiritual side of it is because they feared God and honored God and loved God, and God blessed us. That's why. But we had a couple of missionaries from the Philippines that come up here, and the one talked about the poverty of those Philippines. He lived up in the mountains for a while. Remember him, Mr. White, lived up in the mountains for a while, and then went back to a city and just talked about the poverty of people. Well, I'll kind of tell you what America doesn't have. America doesn't have poverty pretty much anywhere. The people that we call in poverty here are richer than pretty much everybody in Ukraine. Well, not everybody, of course, but 50% at least. The people that are in poverty here in America are richer than 50%. Like, how many of you don't turn your lights on in your house if there's sunlight outside? How many of you are in your house and you don't turn your lights on because there's lights that come in through the windows? I mean, do we have any Amish here? Because the Amish do that. Sometimes. There you go. There you go. Sometimes, yeah. You go into a room, you turn the lights on. That's how we operate. Well, you turn that light on, those dimes start ticking up on your monthly bill. I've been in Ukrainians' houses. They won't turn their lights on ever. I mean, at nighttime, if you need to, they will, but they won't. Why? Because they're poor. It costs money. Okay? How many of you, when washing your dishes, open the crank up and get yourself just a little bit of water, about a little bowl's worth, and you take that water and you use it to wash your dishes and wash your dishes and wash your dishes, and then if you have to at the end, you'll get a little bit more to rinse them off, and then you'll dry them off. And they'll use total about a small little bucket's worth of water, maybe. That's probably a lot. That's probably too much to wash dishes with. Because why? Because running that pump to crank your water in adds some dimes onto your bill. How many of you do that? Maybe there's some people that do that. And maybe some of you guys are thinking, well, that's how my parents used to do it years ago, right? The 1940s generation and 30s generation, like those guys probably did a lot more of this than what we do. But I've never seen that here in America. I've been yelled at in Ukraine for when I tried to help somebody wash dishes over there. I've been yelled at because I use too much water. How many of you take a shower like this? You turn the water on to get wet, and then you turn it off. And then you get the soap and wash yourself off. And then you turn the water back on and rinse off and turn the water off and get out. And you've used like a gallon maximum of water, maybe a half gallon to a gallon of water. How many of you do take a shower like that? There we go. There we go. Army brat over there. All of that, what is it doing? It's saving you dimes. That's what a poor man does. Okay, and even if I'm in Ukraine, I'm not calling them poor because I want them to think like they're rich in the Lord, because even what they had that I just explained to you is a comfort. Like, how many of you shower in hot water? I've been in multiple houses in Ukraine. No hot water. Too much money. How many of you have flushing toilets? Every Saturday. I've been in multiple houses in Ukraine. No. I've seen them to where they go out to that old pump style well. No electricity. Pump. A friend of ours was a missionary in an even poorer place. And he had to go down to the river and lower his bucket in and pull water out that way. And that's how they got it. How many of you, and this is maybe a little bit easier. I don't know how to really, truly explain this. I can't. All I can tell you is what it is. How many of you? So we got Family Fare, we got Meijer, we got Walmart. If you really wanted to drive, you could drive down to Saginaw. And actually, that's kind of what it would be like, similar to. How many of you would go to Meijer and you would see a gallon of milk for $2.98? Is that cheap right now? Yeah. $4.98? Okay, how many of you would go to Meijer and see milk for $3.35 would then drive over to Family Fare and see it for $3.36, drive over to Walmart and see it for $3.37, drive down to Saginaw because you know that down there they sold it for $3.34. Would anybody do that? Because gas. It's a tough illustration. Okay? Like, I know somebody that they, of course, this is walking. That doesn't cost anything but time. She went to 7 or 8 different pharmacies in town because she knew that she could find what she was looking for a penny cheaper. I don't even know if it was a full penny's worth. I think it was probably half a penny. It was like 10 kopeic, and kopeic was like it'd be like 25 kopeiks to make 1 penny, and this thing was that she was looking for was 10 kopeiks cheaper. So it was like a third of a penny cheaper. And she walked to 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 different pharmacies in the town because she knew she could find it for 10 kopeic cheaper, a third of a penny cheaper. And she spent 2 to 3 hours doing that so she could save herself 10 kopeic. Now, I have done that foolishly because I thought gas would be cheaper down the road, right? And I drive down the road and it's more expensive. And then when I drive back, they've already raised their prices up. All the time, you know. We don't have poverty here in America, is what I'm trying to say. Okay? Abundance of idle, pride, fullness of bread, abundance of idleness was in her hands and in her daughters. And that's kind of where we could be as a church. That's where men get to, because remember wasn't it John Adams? He went over to France and they asked him how America was doing, and they asked him if he plays games or if he entertains himself. And he's like, I don't get to entertain myself. I wish I could remember this. He's like, I get to focus on war and strategy so that my kids can focus on mathematics and engineering, so that their kids can focus on arts and not the graces, but the arts and the crafts, I guess, right? I don't get to be entertained. I get to focus on war and fighting so that my kids can grow up in a free land, so that they can focus on math and engineering, so that their kids could have the freedom to focus on the arts. Well, I kind of feel like men in particular, we need to reset back to the challenge to where we're trusting God, not getting through pride, giving all glory to God that we have, not being full of bread, finding a hunger, and not having an abundance of idleness. Say, guilty? Guilty. Okay, I'm guilty. Is that helping anything? Not helping a single thing in the world. Men were caught in a trap. And we need to get out. Get back to trusting God and living for God. Lord, thank you for this afternoon. Thank you for the scriptural truths.